In this week's episode, we catch up with Niall O'Carroll over Teams to hear about his remarkable career journey, from serving as a detective in the Garda to becoming a sports psychologist working with Olympic athletes around the world. Niall talks about the challenges of leaving policing behind, how he found his path into psychology, and what it's like to coach athletes competing at the very highest level. This episode is brought to you by Top Drawer Talent, the supply chain and procurement recruitment specialist. Let's get into it. Here we go. Thanks for coming on. It's nice to finally meet you and put a face to the name.
Absolutely, Connor, yeah.
But you're a sports psychologist by trade now after kind of serving 18 years, I think it was, in the Guards. But is sports psychology now like the difference between like winning and losing?
I don't know. I mean, I think anybody who suggests that like, I don't buy into all this thing about it's 90% mental, or 80% mental, or 10% mental. I think it's another area of preparation that athletes need to be aware of in order to be successful. But I mean, I think psychology is at the heart of everything we do and everything we do well. And having the capacity to manage your mind is definitely the thing that separates the great from the good. But I don't necessarily buy into the idea that it's 90% mental, or like that. There's a lot of people kind of spin a lot of nonsense around psychology. I don't particularly like the industry of sports psychology, to be honest with you, because I think there's a lot of bullshit out there. But the reality is, what I would say, when I've worked with athletes, it's really been around simplifying their lives and their preparation to get them to understand, what they're like at their best, and then how they can be that more consistently. And a big part of that is understanding your habits. And for me, the key element is what I call distraction control. It's understanding that everything that gets in the way of you being able to deliver your best performance is a distraction. And some distractions are huge and massively life-changing, and some distractions are just the phone buzzing in the middle of an interview. Like, they're small. But if you understand how distractions impact on you, you then get to prepare to minimize the impact of those when they happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And how, like, when you're dealing with an athlete in that kind of situation, like, what's the process that you kind of run through with them? Like, is it like sit down, in a room on the couch having a chat? Are you in the gym talking to them while they're in the ring? Or if they're boxing or playing golf, are you walking around doing a round of golf with them having a chat? Or like, how does it work?
It's very different for every individual. It's like, some people need a lot of conversation and a lot of support, and some just get it and just understand where they're at. And sometimes the my role in the past has been working more with the coaches than the athletes, for the coaches to understand their message and how the message lands, so that the person who's actually doing the performing is free to perform and not overburdened with negative messaging, or the wrong kind of messaging that only acts as another distraction. But yeah, to give you kind of a generic kind of view of what I do, I suppose.
Yeah.
The idea would be that you'd sit down with somebody, you do a bit of an evaluation to understand the type of person they are, the what they look like at their very best, what they look like when they're not anywhere near their best, and try to kind of identify those triggers that take them in the different directions, and obviously try and help them to be at their best more often. And that's really as simple as that.
And is it something like that every athlete like must do, or can they opt out of it then at any stage? Or
Well, I don't believe in must. I would always kind of leave it open to the individual to come and talk to you. I think the problem that exists is that, I think my headphones just died. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Oxford.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. This headphone's working. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Sorry, man.
No, you're okay.
I think the challenge is that some people kind of take the approach that every athlete is the same, or that this has to be something that you have to engage with. Everybody is at their best when they're in charge of their mindset and when they're, I mean, there's reasons why for centuries the Eastern philosophy has talked about a flow state and a focused connection and being at one and all that. And there's no doubt that we do the things we do best in life, we tend to do without even thinking about it. If you think about driving a car,
Yeah.
if you were to actively think about every aspect of driving a car, from the minute you press the button to open the doors, to getting into the car, to putting on your seatbelt, to putting the key in the ignition or pressing the button to putting it into gear, if you're thinking about all of that stuff as you're doing it, then
Yeah.
you're not concentrating on doing what it is you should be doing, which is just like driving the car, right? So you're
Okay.
driving down the road. If your thing is like, oh, hang on, now I've got to go to second gear, now I've got to go to third gear, so ideally what you want to do is, and that's the kind of the misconception. It's not that we want to layer more information into an athlete's head, it's that we want to get them to a point where they're so comfortable delivering their performance that they're not distracted or thinking about everything else. And there's an athlete I work with at the moment. And I don't work that much with athletes anymore. I tend to do more kind of strategic governance and leadership stuff, but I do kind of occasionally if it's of interest. And there's an athlete I'm working at the moment, and I've worked with her or a coach and her many times in the past. Um, and her name is Jasmine Camacho Quinn, and she's a 100-meter hurdler. She's an Olympic champion from Tokyo, and she's a bronze medalist from Paris. An amazing athlete. But the big thing, and I think Jasmine's discipline is the ultimate metaphor for life, in that it's it's a 100-meter hurdle. So there's a process for getting out of the blocks and getting into your running, and then you've got to clear the hurdle in front of you. And you don't get distracted by what's going on with the other runners around you. You don't get distracted by the crowd. You don't get distracted by the time. Or so she's preparing for an Olympic final. She's after setting the Olympic record in the semi-final. So she's gone into the final. You can't have her thinking about running the time. God, can I break the world record? Can I run faster? Can I set a new Olympic record? All of that stuff has to be banished, and it has to be about just get into your running, stay relaxed, clear the hurdle in front of you, just one at a time. And you'll hear the cliches in psychology about staying present and about the next challenge, and you'll hear all the footballers and all that, and like they're going, oh, are you looking forward to the final? And they're going, oh, we're thinking about the next game, the next game, the next game. But the reason they're saying that is that as soon as you start to think about, just say there's a final 4 weeks away and you've got two games in between, if you're
Yeah.
thinking about the final, you're not present in the moment doing what you were capable of in those two games, and you're not going to perform. Because as soon as you're
Okay.
not present, you're distracted, so you're not going to perform. So the key thing is, how do we keep you right here over the next hurdle? And the
You're
big
right.
the big challenge, for most athletes is delivering the best performance they're capable of, in the moment repeatedly. So that's kind of what it is like. I mean, it's with Jasmine, like she was phenomenal, and she's an amazing lady and an amazing athlete. But that kind of idea that you know a misconception, and it's said 100 meters. A
Yeah.
misconception is that athletes get faster all the way to the finish line. I mean, Usain Bolt used to storm away in the last 20 yards. It's not because he was getting faster. It's because he had a capacity when he reached top speed to stay relaxed and maintain his speed to the finish. Whereas all the others were trying harder and harder and harder to catch him. And the harder you try, the slower you get. And if you think
Yeah.
about it in life, like if you can get to a point where you're just relaxed and it's flowing out of you, everything happens easier, and it allows you to run faster. So with Jasmine, a big part of her race preparation is about how she stays relaxed, between the hurdles, and then clears that one barrier that you have in front of you. And I think if you think about it, even from a corporate point of view or from anything we do in life, if we're all worried about what's going to happen in 6 months' time, we're not dealing with what we have control over today. And that's really the simplicity, I suppose, of sports psychology.
Okay. And is there are you putting in frameworks or tools that say like meditation before a race, or let's say visualization, like visualizing the win or visualizing the finish line, or is it just literally getting to the finish line or getting to the start line and kind of staying relaxed all the way through to the end?
Well, the key thing with visualization is And visualization is a fascinating one, actually, because, you know, you'll get people in this world who'll say, oh, visualization absolutely improves your performance. And, you know, it does for people that visualization works for. But the key thing, I do an awful lot of work in leadership, and I do a lot of work around neurodiversity and understanding that different approaches to messaging are needed for the different ways our brains work. So one size doesn't fit all. So I can't say to you that visualization is going to change your life, because you might be the kind of person who finds it very hard to sit still quietly and focus. You might be like 100 places at once.
All over the place, yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But it's like the key skill is to find the thing that works for you. But the idea with visualization, I mean, I'm working on it with an athlete at the moment, and the idea with visualization is it's not so much to visualize them winning. It's to them to get into a situation where they see themselves delivering the best performance they're capable of when they go. So what's repeatable? How do you want to be seen? So just say, for example, I remember years ago, I worked with a guy called Carl Morris, who's a psychologist who works on the European Tour Golf. And Carl worked with pretty much anyone who played European Tour Golf who won majors in the 90s and the 20 and the noughties. He worked with them. And I remember he was working with Graham McDowell, the Northern Irish golfer at the time. And Graham McDowell had won a major and had dominated a Ryder Cup in the same year. And the following year, he was way off where he had been. And one thing that was very apparent to Carl Morris was that the way Graham was carrying himself on the course, when he was dominating the Ryder Cup, his shoulders were back. He's not a tall guy, but he looked big, you know, shoulders were back, and he had a bit of a swagger, you know, he was in charge. This was his house kind of thing. And when things weren't going bad, the shoulders were slumped, the head was down, and he was kind of like, and the thing is, whatever, it's not that you're convincing yourself that you're going to win, because it's not that you're lying to yourself. But what it is that if you don't believe you can win, you're absolutely not going to win. So the first step is to kind of say, well, like, how do I want to be seen? How would I want to, if I was looking at myself on TV right now, how would I like to see myself? And you want to see yourself looking confident and your back straight and you're upright. And then obviously there's the technical stuff that coaches will work on. And that's what I mean about it's not 90%. There's no percentage, I believe, about mental skills. Some athletes are brilliantly self-sufficient. Some athletes are extraordinarily needy. And then there's a whole spectrum in between. Right. And it's about figuring out that, like from a visualization, that point of view, it's about kind of calming your brain so that to allow you to do the thing you're trying to do. And a really good example actually is, I don't know if you're a football fan, Connor, but there was a Croatian striker, and in the '98 World Cup, a guy called Davor Suker, and he was the top goal scorer at the '98 World Cup, or joint top goal scorer. And he was just such a talented player. But one thing that I noticed with him was that every time he took a penalty, and he was a penalty taker for them, and he had an amazing career, but every time he took a penalty, he stood like this, with his two fingers to his pulse. And for about 10 seconds before he took the penalty. And I was fascinated, and I met him at an event then afterwards, and I asked him about it. And I was kind of going, oh, you know, are you kind of like, you know, you're like monitoring yourself and you're kind of all this kind of complicated stuff. And he said, no, he said, when I'm excited, my pulse rate gets fast, right? Like all of us. So your heart rate starts pumping blood faster, which means your brain is functioning faster. And he knew that if he was calm and relaxed, he was going to score. He was that good that he had absolute faith in himself to score. So he knew the only risk to him scoring was the heart pumping too fast and the brain going too fast. So he literally stayed there breathing for about 10 seconds until his pulse rate slowed to a point that he was happy with. And then he felt, now I'm calm, I'm going to score. And he did, invariably did, over and over again. He was incredible. But the idea being that if you can control, if you understand what's going on in your body when you're stressed, you then have the power to take control of how you deal with that. So there's a great New Zealand All Black philosophy where they talk about response over reaction. And the idea is that when you react to something, that's the emotion. That's when the blood is up. That's when you're angry. somebody steals your chair on a train or something, and you're like, what the hell? Everything's pumping faster, your face is red, everything's worked up.
Okay.
That's a reaction. A
Right.
response to that is kind of calm, you're in control, and you're kind of going, do you know what, man? This is my ticket. Conductor, get this guy out of there. I'm sitting down in my chair. You're responding to the situation. You're dealing with the situation. You're making a decision. Do I really give a shit? There's about 10 other chairs over there. I can go and sit somewhere else if I want. You're making a decision based on you being in control of the situation. Whereas a reaction is your whole emotion is pumping and you're getting all stressed out. And if we think about it in all of it, and even, I often talk about this when I give talks on stage, and that if you think about it from your personal relationships, you're having a row with your missus or your mate. In the moment, what is actually the most important thing that's going on in that argument? And usually it's the need to be right. It's not just to resolve the argument, it's the need to be right. And you're worked up and you're angry and you need to be heard. If you go out the front door and walk around the block for 10 minutes and think about what's going on and breathe and calm yourself, by the time you come back in the door, the need to be right has quietened and you're more in a situation where you're open to having a conversation about resolving the issue. And that kind of is a very simple kind of example of when we slow our pulse rate, when we calm ourselves down, we are more likely, it's not you're always going to do it, but you're more likely to make rational, logical, good decisions that will impact on the future or the next stage or whatever the case may be, or your evening.
My father's murder. But in terms of like then, like, do you think there's benefits in like writing down your goals, the things that you want to achieve, especially as like maybe an athlete or like a CEO, or even like a high performing employee? Do you think there's benefits in like writing down your goals and moving towards those goals, or do you think that's
I do.
separate thing?
Again, I think it very much depends on the type of person you are. Like I've worked with athletes who are dyslexic and they didn't want to write anything down. But then I'm a big fan of writing things down. I think when you put something down on paper, you kind of make it concrete. So you actually give yourself, there's actions you can take to deal with the issue that's on the piece of paper. I do this, actually, I'm working with another athlete who's a stablemate of Jasmine's at the moment. And she's really struggling with kind of negative speaking about to herself, or her negative voice in her head is quite vocal. And what I've suggested to her is write the thing, like when you have a negative thought in your head, write it down. Because straight away then it stops being notional and it becomes an actual thing. Then, and I basically get her to make about 4 columns on a page. One is to write down what the negative thing is saying. That beside it, write down, flip it on its head, challenge it. So if it's saying you're absolutely useless, you're going, well, actually, I'm training with an Olympic champion coach. I'm, one of the top athletes in my country. I've run X amount of time, blah, blah, blah. Is it true that you're absolutely useless? Absolutely not. Then the next column is about what one thing are you going to do today to change that feeling of being useless? What one thing are you going to do today to change that? How are you going to change that? And I said today. You're not going to alter. Sometimes you're not going to alter the overall view in your head for a long time. But the idea is today, what one thing can I do to make myself feel better about it? And then the last thing is you go back and you evaluate yourself at the end of the day. And in her case, it's when she does races or whatever. And you give yourself a rating out of 10. And I'm very much into the decimal points, so 5.4 or whatever it is. And the idea is, how well did I manage that negative voice today? What was it that I learned about that? And what am I going to do better next time? And then the next day you have another thing that you can build on and another thing. And you slowly change the narrative. Because our brains are like, we still know very little about how our brains function. I mean, there's still, from a neuroscience point of view, there's still the belief that we view the brain like explorers thought the world was flat. We really don't understand how the brain works. We understand a lot more about it than we did, but we're still miles away from having any concept of the real power of the brain. And what we do know is that the negative thinking generally comes from a part of our brain we call the amygdala. And the idea is that the amygdala has existed before our brains evolved into what they are today. or the amygdala existed in the caveman brain. And the idea was that was the thing that kept you alive. That was your warnings system. So if you
Right.
stepped out of the cave and there's a saber-tooth tiger over around the corner, you're like, nope, not going out today, going back
All
in the cave.
supposed
But it was that message that kept you safe. How that has evolved and developed is that it's still keeping you safe, but what it's doing is it's recognizing discomfort in your body, and then it's sending you messages to take that discomfort away. For example, if you have a meeting with a manager in your work and you really don't fancy the meeting, and the message is like, oh Christ, put a duvet back over your head and go back to sleep, don't do that meeting today, put it back till tomorrow. But that message is telling you don't go to that meeting because it recognizes you feel uncomfortable about that meeting. But what it does then is it gives you, it throws the archives of your brain to find information to back up its negative thing. Jesus, the last time you had a meeting with that guy, it didn't go well. Don't do that, And it's like it snowballs into this noise of negativity, when actually what it's trying to do is just stop you feeling uncomfortable. But the thing is, for all of us to achieve things and for all of us to succeed in what we try to do in life, we've got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. So we have to challenge ourselves to do things outside the comfort zone in order for us to grow. So we've got to challenge the brain that's trying to stop us from doing that. So I think if there was one, I would say that if there was one thing that I like to try and help athletes with, and if I think that has an impact positively on their lives, it's that kind of understanding the negative messaging in your brain and quietening it down. Because athletes can be we're all very hard on ourselves. Athletes can be uber hard on themselves because they're rating themselves off, where they finish in a race or what trophies they win, as opposed to, have I turned up the best version of myself today, which is a totally different conversation. And it's a lot easier be happy in your life if you feel like you're delivering the best version of yourself than if you're caught up in thinking, well, if your only purpose is to win an award for podcasting, you're destined, there's going to be, and while you might win awards for podcasting, and that might be a lovely experience, but the other 364 days of that year, you're failing because you haven't won an award. So what is it that you're going to feel good about yourself, and what's going to make you turn up again, and what's going to make you want to be better, and about developing yourself? And it's all about understanding how to be the best version of yourself in whatever moment you're in,
Okay. And is there much of a difference between dealing with an athlete and dealing with a CEO, or are you coaching them on two separate things?
Well, I suppose it's separate things in the sense of the environment that they're performing in and the measurement of the success. But actually, the basic the basic principles are the same. It's like you'd be amazed at how many CEOs that I've worked with who have imposter syndrome and who are kind of constantly worried that Jesus, someday what happens if everybody finds out I don't know what I'm doing? And there's an awful lot of athletes with exactly the same issue, I've been very lucky up to now, and I don't deserve to be here. And really, the ultimate goal in anything we do is to try and clear distractions out of the way so that somebody has the capacity to make good decisions. And to your point, writing down goals is a great thing in the sense, once you're writing down, it's great to have a big picture goal. Like, for example, I worked with a golfer a number of years ago who wanted the Masters. Winning the Masters was their goal. But that's great. Everybody should have the Olympic champion or the world champion or whatever. I want to be the best at whatever I do. That's fine as an ultimate ambition. But your goals have to be about stripping it back to, if you're going to win the Masters, the first thing you've got to do is get into the Masters. And the Masters is the hardest of the four majors in golf to qualify for, because you have to be in the top 50 in the world as a European player. You have to be rated in the top 50 in the world to get an invite, because it's not like the US Open or the British Open where you can qualify. So you have to get an invite. So that means you have to be in the top 50 in the world in order to play at the Masters. If you're going to be in the top 50 in the world, you've got to be playing probably on the American tour and making a lot of money. So there's no point even talking about winning the Masters if you're not even in it yet. So let's strip it all the way back to, what do you need to, the golfer I worked with that day or that time when we were discussing him winning the Masters, the goals we started setting for him were, well, what are you going to do today to take you to the Masters? What are you going to do this week, this month? And that's what we're going to rate you on. That's what we're going to kind of set as the goals and the targets. And the things were like he was concerned about his putting. That was a big issue for him. So we literally went out to the putting green, and the first step we did on him trying to achieve his ultimate goal of winning the Masters was to go out onto the putting green on that day and start working on his putting and his approach to putting. The idea being that everyone's success is built on the little successes you achieve, the little victories every day, every week, every month. And that's where CEOs and athletes, everyone kind of falls into the same category of all you're going to do is build on something day on day on day. And if you can feel like you're moving forward, and if you're a better version of yourself this week than you were last week, and you're a better version again the following week, well, then that's winning, you know. And what it becomes really interesting, and one thing the sport has taught me is that winning is not about the trinkets. Like the amount of Olympic champions I've worked with, who, you know, there's one guy who's extraordinarily successful, and I know for a fact that he's got 7 Olympic medals, and they're all in a drawer in his mother's garage at home. He just hasn't. The medals don't matter, because it's not about the medal. Like, it's about turning up at an Olympic final in the most pressurized environment, watched by the largest television audience, and delivering the performance you're capable of. And the best example I have of that is, you know, I've been very blessed in my role as chair of the Irish Boxing Association to go to Paris, sit ringside and watch Kelly Harrington defend her gold medal. And to watch Kelly in that tournament, where the conversation was never about the gold medal, it was about Kelly delivering the best performance she was capable of every time she went in the ring. And if you watched her through that tournament, every fight she got better. She was phenomenal, and she's a remarkable athlete, and we're very lucky to have had her as an Irish athlete. But that ability to deliver what you're capable of under pressure, that's what winning is. That's what really matters. And all of us can do that. You don't have to be an elite athlete to do that.
Yeah, okay. So, and do you find, like, do athletes like deliver better like in front of like larger crowds, let's say? Or do they deliver better like when there's no one around? Or like, do you have an opinion?
Again, it's a very individual thing, you know. Some people thrive off the noise, some people hate it, you know. Like, you look at, say, a guy like Nick Kyrgios, the Australian tennis player. Fascinating character. And a troubled soul, that a guy who's had his demons and had his struggles. But he kind of thrives off the audience, you know, and he kind of interacts with the audience. And when he's having his negative kind of headspace, he's talking out loud and the audience are joining in. And he always, like, you could see that he just lifted himself when the audience was there. But then equally, he could get distracted by something in the audience that could take him away from his ability to perform. And I would say that he is a guy that if you saw him hitting tennis balls in just practice, just playing with friends, you will see somebody who is probably the most gifted tennis player that's ever played the game. And then you put him into that pressurized environment, and sometimes it elevated him, and he won, you know, Grand Slam titles in doubles, and he was in Grand Slam finals. Yeah. Amazingly talented tennis player. Did he deliver on his ability? Probably not. But then, is he satisfied with his career? Maybe he is, you know. And it's about that kind of nuance, like that sometimes there are people who just love, and Cristiano Ronaldo's a guy. I couldn't imagine Cristiano Ronaldo being happy playing in front of 5,000 people, which is kind of what he's doing down in Saudi Arabia. But maybe are in he is. But you put him in front of 100,000 people and all the television cameras, and the guy just elevated because he loves the attention. You know, okay. It's a very much. I mean, it's a challenge. I mean, there are athletes I've seen who are extraordinarily talented and come to an Olympics, and they just the whole occasion. And I've had athletes who walked out onto a track or into an arena to perform at an Olympics, and they're like, wow, the whole occasion is so huge. And they then stop doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is delivering their performance in the moment. And they're caught up in actually fighting the
Yeah.
occasion. And that's where I'm a great believer in you like if you've worked hard to get to the Olympics, then by Jesus, go and enjoy that Olympics. You've earned a right. Like some people say, oh, treat it like any other event. No, this is the Olympics. You don't treat it the same as everything else. But what you do is you channel your mind into that thing about you enjoy every single moment of it. But when you need to be switched on to deliver your performance, that's when you have to be good at calming everything down and blocking everything out. That's where visualization and stuff comes in.
And how is like right? How are like sports psychologists measured? Right? Because I had like Joey Boland on the podcast. He's a senior at Dublin hurler a few weeks ago, and he was saying like, how do you tell a good psychologist or a good sports psychologist from a bad one? Like,
And you
is there
know,
measurements or are psychologists like measured in like how they
no,
perform or how
and
they
actually,
perform?
it's a very unregulated industry at the moment, and it's actually something that I've kind of swayed both ways on, because for me, it's a very personal thing for an individual.
Hmm.
So whether you're a good psychologist or a bad psychologist, if somebody doesn't get the message you're giving, it's irrelevant because you're bad for them. And
Yeah.
if you're somebody who's a complete fucking chancer or a charlatan or whatever, but an individual hears what you have to say and gets something from it, then good on them. So like there's a movement in Ireland about, oh well, every psychologist needs to be regulated and needs to be signed up to, whatever standard and needs to have a degree from this university and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel that's a little bit elitist in that, if you've got a master's from Trinity, you're a better psychologist than somebody who's done it with the Open University. And I think that's bollocks, to be completely honest with you. Because, and I think that's a myth that like you see it in America all the time, that a degree from an Ivy League university is way better value than a degree from a public college. As far as I'm concerned, you've got a degree. The theory that you learn in college is useful, but it's actually at the end of the day, it's almost worthless because you're only an expert when you've gone into an arena and you've failed and you learn a lesson and you go away with that learning and then regroup and start again. It happened for me in my first professional athlete I worked with in Canada. A very, very successful guy, knew what he was doing. I went in the door fresh out of college, fresh with all this information in my head. And actually, ironically, it was about visualization. And I had all this, like, have I got good news for you? I'm going to get you visualizing and sort your shit out. And,
Yeah.
and his reaction to me was, yeah, I don't do that. I can't. My brain doesn't work that way. I can't. I'm not comfortable in those quiet times, blah, blah, blah. And basically, I had to take all of the theory that I learned in college that I was all set to teach in, chuck it in the bin, and start a conversation with him. Well, who are you? So tell me about you. Let's figure out how you work. What's your sticker? How do we improve it? In the end, we ended up doing visualization, and he ended up being very good at it. But we called it something different, and we used a different way around to get there. But the first thing was we built the relationship and the trust and the bond. And there's a neuroscientist in America that I've done work with and I have a huge respect for. Is a guy called Paul Zak. He's written about 5 books, and his work has all been around trust and understanding trust and how you measure trust and how you bring trust into environments from a leadership perspective. Really fascinating guy. But for me, the key element to building trust is building a relationship with somebody and actually listening to them. So that my view is, and to go back to your question about measuring good and bad, my view is good psychologists or good mindset coaches or mental skill coaches or whatever they call themselves. The good ones don't come in the door with the answers pre-cooked. The good ones come in the door and say, tell me what your problem is and let's figure it out together. Because the theory is only relevant to like anything that tells you that, like science will tell you that, this works. And it's like a drug.
Yeah.
This drug has been tested and it's been passed and it works. But when you actually look under the bonnet, the drug works for 8 out of 10 people, which means that 2 out of 10 people that drug doesn't work for. So they're lying to you when they say the drug works. What they're saying is it will work for the majority of people. but you don't know that, like, you could have a room full of the 2 out of 10.
Yeah.
And this
Okay.
drug is worthless. So it's kind of that like understanding science, leaning into science, understanding the research and all of the learning that's been there. But the learning I love to hear is the stuff that's failed. I think every athlete who's ever achieved any success, or anyone even in business or entrepreneurs, startups, all of the people who've achieved success in those areas, and it's the subject of a book that I'm going to publish shortly,
Okay.
is the understanding that your successes are built off your failures, and understanding that it's your ability to pivot when life throws shit your way. It's that ability to pivot is what dictates your success over somebody else. There isn't any athlete, there isn't any businessman who's ever had every single thing they touch turn to gold. Everybody has failures, and it's what you learn from your failures dictate how good you are at the next thing you do. And that's kind of, for me, like I've worked with teams, and I've had no impact, or very minimal, or I might have impacted one player. But part of the issue is that if the hierarchy, it's kind of like in a company, if the CEO doesn't believe in an initiative the company's bringing in, or if he doesn't or if the senior leadership team don't communicate support and really get behind something, it's not going to go anywhere. So when you have like DE&I, or you have well-being initiatives or whatever, if there isn't a complete buy-in across the company, they're not going to work. Because most of the people in the organization, they go, I could be arsed, and they don't care if I do it, so why would I bother? But if everybody is on the same path, everybody's connected and giving the same kind of messaging, you're much more likely to get buy-in and to have impact and to get success. And it's understanding, for me, like anytime I felt like I failed, I've gone away afterwards and spent some time having a good think about, well, why did that not work, and what was missing? And what did I have control over, and what was outside my control? But how do I ensure, if I'm working with a coach or a manager or a high performance director who doesn't believe in the work I'm doing, how do I still have an impact with those athletes, or am I wasting my time? And you kind of, that's what experience is. You learn and you make better decisions, you hope, the next time.
Yeah. Was this like something that was like sports psychology, like, or mental performance, always something you had an interest in, or did this kind of just develop over the years?
Well, in hindsight, looking back, I mean, there was no real sports psychology when I did my degree. It was relatively, I mean, Bob Rotella had written a couple of books about golf, the inner game of golf, and a guy called Tim Galway had written a couple of books about tennis, and they were really the only sports psychologists that were out there that I knew of. But I'd always a fascination with human behavior, and I didn't have a particularly great experience in school. I talked about neurodiversity, and I've got my own neurodiversity challenges that are less challenges these days and more superpowers. But in school, I struggled in school, and the weird thing was, I felt smart. I felt like I had all the answers in the classroom. I felt like I quite often I wouldn't put my hand up to answer a question because I thought it was too obvious, and then somebody else would have the answer for the same answer for the question. But when it came to exams, I just couldn't perform. I was terrible at exams. I'd get anxious, and things would go to my head, and I just wasn't, and I wasn't good at staying focused for a couple of hours in an exam hall. I'd get distracted and all that kind of stuff. So I never had the results in exams that reflected, like, I had teachers telling me that, oh, well, you're going to get an A, and I'm going to go, well, you've no evidence for that because I've never gotten an A in my life. But my performance in class suggested to them that I was going to do really well, but my performance in exams was terrible. Okay. So I left school not feeling very smart, and I didn't really.
Did you get all the way through to Leaving Cert?
I did the Leaving Cert only because I have to give my parents credit, because it was a constant battle to keep me in school. I wanted to leave school. I wanted to take up a trade, and I kind of regret not taking up a trade, to be honest with you, because that's the best way to make money in this country. but I kind of wanted. I felt like I was capable of doing something cool, but I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know where to go. But I stuck to Leaving out anyway, and I got through it, and I did okay. I mean, I didn't fail it or anything, but but I ended up I ended up applying for the guards when, back in the late 80s in Ireland. You worked in, like, if you got a job in the guards, the civil service, or the bank. That was really the only jobs that were hiring, because our economy was in the toilet. I got a job in the guards, and I kind of plodded my way. I like most of the people I was in Templemore with were kind of like uber excited. It was like their life ambition to be a guard. And some great people, and some of them did great things in the guards, and some of them are still there in the very senior levels. But to me, this is a handy way for me to get a paycheck and not push myself and not get out of my comfort zone and not have to think too hard, and just do what I'm told. It was like tick all the boxes. And
would you have played much sport yourself, like back when you were younger?
I was a sports nut. I played everything. So okay. I played under 18 rugby with Munster, and I played some decent level soccer. I found myself getting down to almost down to scratch as a golfer. I'm not a bad tennis player. I had a great I had a talent for sport, but the same thing that held me back in school held me back in sport, in that I had this negative voice that was imposter syndrome, whatever. You're not good enough. Why are you bothering? And because I didn't believe in myself, I then held back from what I could have achieved in sport. I didn't really, I feel. And probably my own narrative is probably what fascinated me most about human behavior. Yeah. And then I started working in guards and...
Yeah. See, with those experiences, right, that you had, like in school, like, not being able to perform exams, but being smart in the class, what would you now change in second level education, if you could go back, or if you could change something?
Oh man,
like, what would you change, or what would you implement?
It would be, I would say, my life's ambition to get into work in the Department of Education, to really challenge them to change things. And change understanding of neurodiversity. I mean, they're still not training teachers in teacher training college to understand neurodiversity. They still treat neurodiversity as a problem. And I had that recently. My own daughter just finished her leaving, and when she was preparing for her junior cert, I had a teacher send me an email and tell me, a teacher, my daughter had been diagnosed with dyslexia. My son had very heavy, he was very heavily dyslexic, and then dyspraxia and dyscalculia and all sorts. My daughter less so, but she did have dyslexia, and she was diagnosed by a psychologist. And a teacher took it on herself to assess my daughter in school, to basically challenge the assessment of the psychologist, and sent me an email telling me, and I'll never forget it, because it just, to me, it sums up what's wrong in school. She sent me an email saying, "Great news. We tested your daughter, and she doesn't need additional resources for her exams." And I asked for a meeting with her. And when I went in to meet her, I asked her, I said, "Why is it great news?" I said, I understand where you're coming from, but I said, if my daughter needs additional resources, that's just how she learns. It's not a negative. There's nothing wrong with her. It's just how she learns. So it's not great news. It's, look, this is what she needs. Let's give her what she needs. But the teachers, their education, their training, and their approach is to get everybody through the same curriculum, designed for the same brain, to get them through as quickly as possible to the end so that they pass exams. They're not educating kids for life. They're not trying to develop their personalities. They're getting them through exams. And part of the problem when you're trying to get through a curriculum, and part of the problem in the education system, is that we've got a rating system for schools based on results and exams, which is utterly ridiculous. Because, like, some of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world are dyslexic or have ADHD. It's recognized as a trait of success in entrepreneurship now, like in startups. ADHD, because people who go through a schooling system that absolutely isn't designed for them, and they're so frustrated in the system, they start to think outside the box about how they're going to make a living after school, and they start to identify new opportunities. The world has been changed by people whose brains think differently. And part of the problem we have is we think about neurodiverse as, so if you've got ADHD, this is your problem. You're dopamine deficient, you're distracted, whatever. If you've got dyslexia, this is your problem. You're slow reading and you need additional support. If you're autistic, this is your problem. But actually, if we stopped and started to think about the very concept of neurodiversity, the definition of neurodiversity is somebody whose brain thinks outside the norm. How is that a negative, for one thing? Secondly, how many normal people have you met in your life? And how many normal people have you worked with? You know, everybody I've worked with, everybody I've had a relationship with or been friendly with, have their irrationalities, their triggers, their attention issues, everybody, I believe, we're all on a spectrum and we all have challenges. And the key element of education shouldn't be about getting you through exams, which are only designed for a certain type of brain anyway. The key element of education should be about creating a rounded individual who's ready to go out into the world and make an impact. And if you think about it, like, I mean, look, obviously this is a passionate thing for me, but if you even think about like we traditionally, like, just say, for example, with autism, we traditionally think of autism as being, there's the nonverbal kind of, challenge to adjust to life. And then there's, this famous spectrum they talk about. But within that spectrum, think about the C-suite in organizations. What traditionally has it taken to be a CEO or a CEO or a CFO in an organization? And it's all spreadsheet driven, bottom line, data driven, very, very detailed. If you look at C-suite in most organizations over the last 50 years, you're going to see an awful lot of people who are legally trained or accountancy trained. What do you need in order to have a great legal brain or a great accountancy brain? Or even the medical industry. The medical industry is full of neurodiversity, most of it undiagnosed. But what are we doing? We're generating people who pass exams, who get high scores in exams. So you're rewarding one type of neurodiverse person who can bury their head in the book and get results. And then you're completely discarding another type of neurodiversity. And actually, we should be bringing it all together and trying to have conversations about, because that doesn't work either. And that's why it's only in the last few years that innovation and creativity has started to be recognized at C-suite level. Google created a chief innovation officer, which is the first time that's happened. And it's suddenly, people are starting to realize that being a little bit different and being creative and being a bit flaky is actually a positive. And there's room for it too.
Yeah. Seeing those like organizations, like, the big tech firms like Google or whatever, right? Like, you do have to have like a certain level of education to get in the door, right? So if you don't have that level of education, if your brain's a bit different, maybe they're not getting the right people through the door.
100%. And by no means am I saying that Google are an example of a good employer.
Yeah. No, I know.
All those American tech companies, they're brilliant at having their slides and their fun rooms and their all in just nonsense. And their cultures are really shocking and poor. But the thing is, I suppose there's a challenge, and actually it's a really interesting challenge for the recruitment industry right now.
Yeah.
Like, I've spent the morning interviewing candidates for a role for boxing. And I found myself fascinated and having conversations with the panel afterwards about how the whole recruitment industry is like, who has the best CV, who does the best interview. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're the best person to do the job. And understanding, like, getting caught up in things like qualifications. I never particularly am interested in qualifications when it comes to a job. I want to hear somebody's life experience and their ability to think outside the box and how they can bring something new and different to a role. And I think the recruitment industry has an awful long way to go, even just on the simple thing of having an interview. If your brain works in a slightly different way, interviews can be really, really difficult. And understanding that, if we want to create environments where we get the best people to do the job, and not create environments where we reward the people who went to Harvard or who went to Oxford or who went to Trinity, and just, and they're a better candidate because they went to Trinity, when actually all of the research shows us that the vast majority of people who come out of those roles are from a section of society that are more fortunate and have more opportunity to those roles, and it's not reflective of society or of the best candidates,
As well. Yeah, I think the three main things I'd look for when I'm recruiting a candidate would be warmth. Are they like, can I deal with them on a daily basis? Their attitude, and then is there a level of confidence? But now, if you want to come work with me, you don't have to have confidence in being a recruiter. You just have to show me that you have some level of confidence doing something, so that I can train you then to do what I need you to do. But it does have a long way to come, like a long way to go. Like some companies just have tick sheets, and you have to tick the box, and you have to score a certain amount of points, and it can be unfair, and they can miss because sometimes it's not the best person for the job that actually gets the job. It's the best interviewee gets the job. So it can be. Yeah, it can be challenging sometimes, but that's what we're here for, right? But going back to yourself then, right? You're in the Guards for a while. You thought you'd have an easy life there, but you spent 18 years there. Why did you stay so long?
Because I had an easy life, I think is the honest answer, and because I had a thing in my head that I wasn't capable of anything else. When you get into that negative loop in your head, it's very hard to get out of it. And what happened was I went back to college. I was probably heading towards 30. And I went back to college and did a degree. And I mentioned the Open University earlier on. I did my degree through the Open University. And I was blessed to be able to do it because I did it while I was working in a part-time. The Guards were brilliant in giving me the space to do my exams and to advance myself. And while it wasn't a job that I particularly enjoyed, I did respect that, and I did enjoy the people I worked with. I just didn't enjoy the environment,
When you say the environment, like, what do you mean by that? Like the environment, like, is that like the actual job and the people you had to deal with, or?
Yeah, I suppose I struggled a bit with the concept of, like, it's very black and white. If you commit a crime, you're bad. And if you don't commit a crime, you're good. And I was fascinated by why people were committing crime and what like when I joined when I was in uniform, I was stationed in Store Street, which is in around Sean McDormand Street and Sheriff Street, and it was and in the early 90s, the banking center wasn't there, so it was a fairly bleak. It was all tenement buildings and drug dealing, stolen cars down the flats every night of the week, and all that kind of stuff. Like, it was insane stuff. Like, it was an amazing experience, actually. But I was really fascinated by like, I was seeing individuals getting arrested, and there were all sorts of different reasons. And some people are, inherently, they have, not particularly nice personas, but then there are a lot of people who it's just circumstance, and it's their upbringing is all they know, and and I just felt like there was people whose futures have been written off without anyone really kind of getting under the hood of the issues in society that could be fixed, that could solve a lot of these problems. And one of the examples I've seen in my recent work, like working in boxing, is the amount of kids who have avoided criminal records or have recovered from criminal records or avoided drugs or have come back from drugs by being involved in a boxing club. It's incredible. And it just reinforces on a very simple level that when the kids had an outlet and a place to go where they got discipline, where they got support, that they probably weren't getting at home. When they suddenly realized they were good at something and were getting praised for something, their whole mindset, their whole future changed. They're still the same environment. They're still living in the same neighborhoods. Kelly Harrington talking about like going to the boxing club in Sheriff Street. They all come from the same environments where there's a lot of kids who end up, with drug addiction or in prison or whatever. So why is it that one outlet can lead a kid to a bright future and another outlet doesn't? And it just got me, like, I was fascinated by the fascination with, just say a celebrity had an overdose of cocaine.
Right. Yeah.
That was an incredibly sad, to be this really sad narrative in the papers, and we talk about, oh, isn't it terrible, and God loves them, and it's really unfortunate, and it is, and I mean, nobody, like, it's not a good news story for anyone. But if a kid died of a heroin overdose, down at the corner of St. Mary's Mansions, nobody gave a shit. Like, that devil junkie. And why is it? Because we know the name, somebody's popular, that they taking drugs, it was understandable. Like musicians taking drugs, and the amount of musicians who die from drug overdoses, or the amount of musicians who've sadly taken their own lives, and it's become a very common thing in the last 10 years or so. But the amount of, like, because they're celebrities and because we know them, it's very, very sad. But when it's happening every day on our streets to individuals that matter to their families but don't matter to society, then it's just awful. And I was fascinated by that. So when I did my degree and I studied psychology, I wanted to learn more about why people do what they do, and how we can shape it. And then I discovered a book by a professor in Canada called Terry Orlick, who was a kind of a groundbreaker in thinking around sports psychology. And he wrote a book called The Pursuit of Excellence. And the message in the book was brilliant, because it was really kind of saying there's no such thing as perfection. So the only thing you have the choice of is whether you want to be excellent or not. And you get this option of turning up every day with a mindset of, I'm going to be excellent today. And what does excellence look like? And you build on the behaviors of what being excellent looks like in whatever environment you're in. And I thought it was fascinating. And I sent him an email. He was the head of a department at the University of Ottawa. And I sent him an email just out of pure chance. Typical Paddy, chance your arm, say hello. I sent an email to his department for his attention, and I was amazed about 3 weeks later when he answered it, and we ended up in a bit of a conversation. And then we started having some Skype calls. That's how long ago it was. Skype was popular.
Right,
It was the only video. It was the only video meeting thing at the time. It's like every COVID changed everything. But we had some Skype calls, and next thing he invited me over, and all of a sudden I ended up in a relationship with a guy who was my mentor, and he was phenomenal, and it changed the world for me.
Yes. And do you think, like, you were stuck in that, like, psychological contract in the Guards, and then when you built up the courage, or let's say, the belief in yourself to go to college to study something new, that's when you kind of start thinking, oh Jesus, this is not for me, I'm going to break away now?
Yeah, I think I kind of knew it wasn't for me all along, to be honest. I remember myself and a colleague, the two of us, it was the first week in Templemore. He was a guy from Templeogue in Dublin, and he was the least guard-like guy you ever came across. His brother had a band who were quite popular at the time, and the two of us ended up being roadies for the band when we'd be off weekends, and he was a great character. And we made an agreement with each other at the time that we wouldn't stay 10 years. The two of, like, he was like, oh man, what are we doing here? He couldn't cope with being in Templemore. Like, this is like being in the outback, like, he couldn't get his head around it. He was a great character, and a really lovely human, but a great character. But he ended up leaving the job after 10 years, and he trained to be a barrister. And he's actually he's working as a solicitor in Dublin now, and he's a great guy, and he's done a great career for himself. And I felt like I'd let him down because I stayed in past the 10 years.
You stayed.
So, like, obviously from day one we were talking about getting out. But I think, to be honest with you, doing the degree was such a huge thing for me personally, because suddenly I realized that I wasn't stupid, and maybe there was something going on there. I felt like I was smart, but I had no evidence to back it up. And then what I did was I started working with some athletes and teams through Terry before I left the Guards. It was kind of like a test case thing, and all of a sudden I was standing up. I'll always remember going to speak to a professional team that were like players earning millions of dollars and stuff, and I went into the room and I gave a talk on it was identity, actually, I was talking about, and they hung on everything I said, and it landed really well, and they were really, really positive afterwards. And I walked out of the room, and the self-belief I had, I'd never gotten that once in the Guards, where somebody actually wanted to hear what I had to say. And to be honest with you, probably rightly so, because I believed in a certain image of myself, I probably portrayed a certain image of myself, and I was a bit of a messer, and all I wanted was to go for a few pints at the lads and just have the crack. So because I kind of aimed lower because I believed that's all I was worthy of. And everything changed then. Once they started listening to me, I went, Jesus, there's a different world out there. And I could never go back after that. So it took me a few years to leave. There was a kind of a certain amount of toing and froing and taking contracts in Europe and all sorts of places just to kind of to figure it out. But eventually I left. And I have to say it's the best decision I ever made. And even though I'm doing some work now in certain areas, helping the guards understand behaviours and that, which I love. I remember my poor mum was heartbroken because I had this safe, secure job, a guaranteed pension, and now I was going to have to do something she'd never even heard of in another country. And she often would ask me, and she has even asked me in recent years, she'd go, would you ever go back?
Would you go
And I'm like, absolutely not. But I've actually kind of gone back in the sense that I'm doing some work with them on a certain level now, which is really interesting and entertaining.
Yeah. Did it take? Were you promoted in the guards, or did you just move to different units, or what?
Well, promoted in the sense that I became a detective, which from the outside looking in is like a big promotion. I also remember a sergeant friend of mine telling me he out for a pint with a few friends who weren't in the guards, and a sergeant is a promotion, whereas a detective is just kind of, you're still a guard, you're just a fancier guard.
Close.
But the sergeant was told, Jesus, that lad over there, do you know him now? You want to be nice to him now. He's a detective, like he can get you on the. And the sergeant's kind of going, I'd be his boss, I never went for promotion as such. But I was a detective for the last 10 years really before I went, and I worked in a couple of different units. I worked in immigration, and I worked in computer crime and a few other areas like that. And it was fascinating, but also like the computer crime stuff was quite tough to deal with because you're dealing with fairly heavy images of not particularly nice crimes. But it was a fascinating. It's hard to believe looking back that I feel like I'm talking about a different person in a different lifetime.
Yeah.
But I find it hard to believe now, knowing what I know now, that I stayed as long as I did. But I stayed as long as I did because of the way my brain, the way I was conditioned from school.
Yeah. Would you recommend it as a career now, like for someone to join the guards, or a young person coming out of school or college even?
Well, I mean, it's a very different job to the one I joined. I mean, the whole thing when I joined was you had this guarantee, the salary was decent, you had a guaranteed pension, all that. The crowd, the recruits now don't get paid very much at all, and trying to live in Dublin on no money is hard. And they don't have the pension arrangements that we had, so it's not as attractive. But it's a job where, I would always say that, like, the people I'm working with within the guards now, and they're working in specialized units, but they're very good, very smart people who are doing very good things and changing the culture. And I think there's great capacity to impact positively on society. Even like there are times, even in the old days when I was there, and there's times when I interacted with people where it could have gone one way, and because of the approach I took, it went a different way. And like somebody drunk coming out of Rumors at 2:00 in the morning on O'Connell Street, which was the go-to place at one time. But it could end up in a row and being arrested. But then I always kind of took a bit of a relaxed, kind of a bit of a casual approach, and I'd have the laugh with them and calm them down and send them home. And you kind of walk away feeling good about yourself that you impacted somebody's life positively, and you kind of, somebody didn't necessarily have to go down a road. Like, it doesn't have to go one way. There are other ways you can deal with things. And I think if you're the kind of person who likes to have a positive impact on the world, then I think it's a job that could be very rewarding, but it can be very frustrating. Because it's very hierarchical, and I don't know enough about the culture in it today to know if it's a job that's worth joining or not. But I would say that for most of my friends who stayed in it, it's been very rewarding for them. It just wasn't the thing that lit my fire, unfortunately.
Yeah. Did you make it to pension age, like the pension age, and the service to get the full pension, or did you have enough?
No, and most of the lads look at me like I was mad because I was you do 30 years. You have to reach the age of 50, but you have to
Right.
have 30 years done. So if you join the Guards at 22, you can retire at 52. That's the first year eligible to retire. So
Yeah.
allowing for the fact that I could be retired now for the last few years on a full pension, you kind of go, Jesus, that would have been handy.
Yeah.
But I was 10, 12 years out from retirement. So I was kind of at that stage where for most people, once you've gone that far, you might as well just see it out. But
Yeah.
I just for my own mental health kind of needed to make that change. And I don't regret a minute of it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Anyone that's in there, right? Like that's thinking about leaving, that's maybe thinking about going the full kind of 30 years, or like they want to leave at the 5 or 10 year mark. Like what advice would you give them before they kind of make the decision to hand in their notice?
Well, one thing I'm passionate about is spending some time trying to figure out what your transferable skills are, because you're not encouraged. And this is the same, say, in the construction industry or in sport or whatever, that you're focused on a certain area for a long period of time, and you see
Yeah.
yourself as being confined to that area. So if you think about the skills that you are developing within that environment that can be used in other environments, you start to realize that you're actually, like, we used to have a common joke in the Guards that we were all unskilled laborers. And um, to a large degree you are, but then the skills you develop, like the conflict resolution, the working in a team, the being task oriented, all these things are things that employers look for. And I used to work with, and I've done some stuff with Out of the Blue with Stephen's
Stephen, yeah.
organization that are um, positively trying to help people moving out of, say, the military or the Guards or emergency services, and help them understand the careers they can have. Because just say you retire at 50, like
Yeah.
nowadays, 50 you're still very, very young.
It's young, yeah.
You still have, like, if you want, you still have 20 years of work ahead of you if you want. Where the emergency services are difficult is if you're in shift work for 20 years or 30 years, that can have a big impact on your body. But I would argue that if you can really focus in on, what I've done with an awful lot of people is, there was an article in Forbes magazine a few years back about the 10 most desirable skills employers look for when they're hiring.
Right.
And it was all about, being a team player, being task oriented, seeing things out to the end, being good relationship builder, and having good conflict resolution skills. And they're like tick, 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 tick. So if we were to kind of challenge ourselves to get out of the environment we're in and the small-minded area and mindset that we develop, and start to think about, well, actually, what are my skills? You'd be amazed at the things that you're capable of doing, that you learn in an environment like that.
Yeah. That's quite tough. And when you decided to leave then, how did you get the next job? Did you have it lined up before you left, or did you leave and then kind of go looking for a job in
No,
kind of
I
between?
I kind of I availed of one of the great things about the Guards is the way the shift works, so that you might get like 5 days on and 3 days off kind of thing. And so I was
Right.
using my time off to work, and I was traveling, and I was even over back to Canada, to be honest with you, doing jobs and just kind of checking it out. And it was
Yeah.
when I realized that the work was there long term, that I went, right, I'm going to go. And one of the things I did was I approached, it was around the time that the economy was starting to turn, and I approached the Irish for a career break. Um,
Right.
and because of the unit I was in at the time, the computer crime unit, they were a bit short on skilled people, so they didn't want to let me go, which I thought was a bit short-sighted of them. And they wouldn't give me the career break, so I resigned. I just went, right, grand and gone, because I knew I had to go. So it was a bit scary. I'd headed off
Yeah.
to a different country in a different environment and a different work. But it's the smartest thing I've ever done. And sometimes, I put a quote on a LinkedIn post my partner put out the other day, where she talked about moving from England to Ireland 17 years ago with nothing in place. And I was kind of applauding her courage, but I've said, it's the exact same thing as I thought at the time, that there's a quote attributed to Martin Luther King that's, you don't need to see the whole stairs, just take the first step in faith. And for me, it was I had to take that step. If I stayed, I honestly, I'm not overstating it by saying my mental health needed to make that move. But it was scary. Like sometimes it like to take something that were like I was guaranteed a pension. And by and large, in the guards at that stage, I mean, no matter what you did, you couldn't be fired unless you really broke the law. Like, I mean, it was a safe job. You were guaranteed a job.
Yeah.
I was guaranteed a job till the end of my time. Like, but it just wasn't me. And safe is not something that fits well with me. So since then, I've pretty much gone the opposite. And since then I've lived in about 10 different countries and had a fairly dramatic changes of direction. So
Being a free spirit. But like, was Canada just where the work was, or was Canada a place that kind of interested you in general?
well, it was where the work was, but it also interested me. I mean, it's a phenomenal place, and there's so many Irish living there now. And it was very noticeable to me when I came home how many Irish were in the neighborhood that I was living in compared to when I'd moved there. And but it's a country. It's an incredible place, and I would recommend it to any kid who was thinking about taking a change of scenery. Part of the attraction to it for me was that it was only 7.5 hour flight home compared to
Yeah.
Australia, which is 24
24.
hours. And
Northwest.
I also like one of the things I love about Canada is the season change. Like people think about the winters, and the winters are rough, but the summers are really hot, and then spring and autumn are incredible. Like you very clear definition. Not like Ireland where it's
It's
slightly
raining
less
every day.
cloudy in the summer. But
It's madness.
our
Oh,
weather is 50 shades of grey, like.
it's a
Except for
great way
today,
to
of
put
course.
it, yeah. I'll be here for a week. And then, right, so I'll try not to keep it too much longer. But yourself now, right? Like, what do you do, right? What do you do now? Like, how are you making money, or what's your business now?
So, kind of what I did was I set up a consultancy when I was over there, and that consultancy then led me, like, for the first 10 years, I'd say when I was there, I worked directly with athletes and teams. And I went to 5 Olympics, and I worked with Super Bowl winners and World Cup winners and all sorts of very cool things. And then I started to focus on governance, leadership, and strategy. And I started working with sporting organizations around that area. So moving away from the direct work with athletes and more around building strategies and actually understanding culture. And I think I call it culture charter. And I like to do kind of a culture toolkit, and that to help companies understand, well, what actually is culture? Because there's so much nonsense talked about it. And
Yeah, don't know
really,
this.
your culture are the relationships you have in your company. And it's built off trust, and it's built off authenticity and being honest and telling people, like giving people feedback that's actually true and not just peddling HR lines, and actually being less concerned about the HR legal outcomes and more concerned about doing the right thing day in, day out. That creates an environment where everybody is on the same page, and you have less worries about having to performance manage someone out of the company because they've understood this, all the stages of the process. So like I kind of like that took me, like I worked in senior gym in Canada, I worked in British gymnastics in a management position. I went down to the Auckland Blues and set up kind of a leadership, mental skills kind of strategy for the Auckland Blues. I've been kind of around the world really, and then I came back to Ireland in the pandemic. My dad was very ill, and I came back to look after him at the end of his time. And I decided very quickly when I came back to Ireland that I wasn't going to eat if I was going to work in sport because there's no money. I saw no money in sport. So I started doing consultancy in the corporate space, and I did some consultancy in startup. And then I started working with senior leaders and CEOs and that around all of the kind of mindsets of leadership and building a culture and understanding governance and understanding how to build relationships and all that kind of stuff. And that's what I do now. And I've brought, like, I'm putting together a program that I'm hoping to roll out across sport in Ireland towards the end of the year, which is very much around leadership and messaging to bring all aspects of society into the mix understanding, not to focus on neurodiversity, but understanding that everyone has a different way to channel information and bringing people together and using the program includes, I've got a guy who runs the leadership development program for the Navy SEALs. I've got a guy who's working in a mental skills capacity in the LA Kings. I've got somebody who's running the New Zealand rugby leadership development program, and we're trying to do something a little bit different to get people to kind of think about challenge preconceptions, like understand. Let's go back to the initial point: understand the theory, but then challenge it and go about, well, how has that theory failed, and what going to teach us the next lesson about being absolutely I suppose, approach to that pursuit of excellence concept that Terry Orlick had written about back in the day.
Right. Okay. And if someone wants to get involved, or like there's a CEO that's interested, how do they reach out, or how do they get involved in the
Well,
course?
the easiest way is I have a website, nileoc.ie, and if they want to check out that, and they can send me an email at me@nileoc.ie. And that's the easiest way to start a conversation. Or check me out on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's about the only social media I use. So if you want to message me, like messaging me on Facebook or Instagram is pointless, but message me on LinkedIn or send me an email to me@nileoc.ie.
All right, brilliant. No, that's perfect. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Connor. I really enjoyed it.
A special thanks to Niall for coming onto the podcast. If you'd like to know more about Niall, you can find links to his website and his LinkedIn profile in the description below. If you also enjoyed the episode, if you could hit that like, subscribe, and follow button, that'd be great. Thanks for listening.